Welcome to the Discipleship on Repeat podcast. I'm your host, Matt. With me, as always, I got my buddy, Chris.
Hey, Matt. How are you, brother?
Doing great, man. Really excited to be here. And really, our goal, I'm glad you joined us, but our goal for this podcast is to entertain and enlighten and encourage you, our listeners in Christ. And really, we wanted to talk about, this is our first episode, we wanted to talk about a little bit about what this podcast is about and what to expect from it each and every time, and a little bit about us. And really just starting with, this podcast, I'm telling you, is just something that has been in the works for many years, I think, if I'm being honest. And I think Chris and I both just have this burden to share the good news, and we were just listening to God's prompting, and we wanted just to share our life experiences and just share the good news because we feel important about getting that out there, right, Chris?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Yeah, just going out into the world and making disciples and to share God's word, that's what we're supposed to be doing. And this is a great opportunity for us to reach even more people that are outside our normal circles. And so I think just us stepping out in an act of obedience to God's call and direction for this podcast, I think is a huge step in my faith, I know for sure. And thanks for this opportunity to join you, Matt. Appreciate you.
Absolutely, man. Couldn't think of a better person to do it with, and just excited to do it. And, with the technology that's out there today, we have this opportunity to do that. We can reach more people than you ever have, really, and before throughout history. And we just feel like it's an opportunity that we can grow and have our faith grow through this. And time is of the essence. The loss is growing by the day worldwide, but so is the saved. And
That's right.
We want to be a part of that and do our part. And really, our end goal is just to make disciples, teach everybody about discipleship, but ultimately create disciples in you, our listeners, so you in turn share it to the people in your life.
That's right.
And just continue to pay that forward continuously.
That's right. Yeah, we just want to be able to really just impart on our listeners some of our experiences, definitely be in the Word, and share that with our listeners, and give them that encouragement as well as that entertainment, for sure. But I think just being able to for us to push our vulnerability and our comfort zone just a little bit, and to show our listeners that they can do that too. I think that's important.
That's right. And I know there's a lot of podcasts out there, a lot of Christian podcasts, and really of so many. There's thousands, millions of them out there. We hope to just create this space that, maybe is a little different than others are out there. We want to, of course, kind of share a little bit about the good news, of course, and enlighten you. We also want to encourage you and help you to grow in your faith and give you some applications, some practical things you can do in your life to grow closer and be a disciple. And also just entertain you, of course, along the way, like our motto says there. But just to have this kind of space really where kind of a Bible study, commentary and vulnerability, where they all kind of intersect into one. So we kind of want to try to separate ourselves a little bit from some of the other ones out there, right, just so we can bring something fresh, bring something new to the listeners out there, so you can hopefully come back each week and so we can entertain, enlighten, and encourage you, essentially.
Yeah, for real. And I think it's important to remind our listeners, we're just regular people too.
Right.
We have regular jobs just like everyone else, and we're sinners. We're all sinners, just hopelessly in need of a Savior. And so thank God that Jesus came to save us. And just wanted to remind everyone, we all are going to say things from time to time that may not be exactly perfect. And, our hope is on this podcast that we give each other some grace. Our listeners will give us a little bit of grace and really just listen for our heart and what we're trying to pass along, and the information, knowledge, the testimonies, experience that we pass along. Just we want the listener to grasp the big concept that we're trying to talk about.
For sure, man. That's 100% it. And that's a great segue, because ultimately we aren't, if you're looking for a couple of dudes that got it all together, well, you found the wrong place. Because, we've both been put through the ringer in life with so many different things. But those experiences have shaped us into who we are, helped us to become more well-rounded, have a robust faith. And that's really what we want to have all our listeners to have as well. So today we're going to set a little framework, obviously, about what our each episodes are going to be like. This episode is going to be different than really any other. This one's just kind of setting the table. A little bit about ourselves, what we're going to talk about, and then lastly, just we're going to hope to spark a movement out there, and we're going to share that at the end. But before we get into that, talking a bit about ourselves. So, for me, I just want to talk a bit about our backgrounds and everything. Just share a little bit about who we are to our listeners out there. Again, my name's Matt, and I've come from a Christian family, and thankful to be part of that. Legacy is extremely important to me. I love my parents deeply, my step parents as well, and just couldn't be thankful more for the people that I can call my blood family. And I want to talk a bit about how I got to my faith and where I am today. So, growing up in Texas, where I'm from, I remember some of my first and really earliest memories in life were thinking about the afterlife. I think I went to a funeral. I think I was probably around 6 or 7, the first funeral I ever went to. Mm-hmm. And I think that just between that and the church I was going through at the time, just kind of put all these thoughts in my head about the afterlife. So I just remember thinking about it a lot, some of my earliest memories, honestly. And so one night when I was 7 years old, I had gone to bed and getting ready for school the next day. And I think I came out just a few minutes later and talked to my mom and my stepdad, and I said, hey, I can't go to sleep tonight. I don't know where I'm going to end up when I die, And so right then my mom's like, hey, let's get the Bible. And we went into my bedroom with my stepdad and her, and we read from Scripture. And from that moment, that night is when I got saved.
That's awesome.
And I know in my heart and my life was changed at that point. Our spiritual enemies told me many times that, hey, that wasn't true. And, there's no way, you're too young, but I know in my heart of hearts that was the moment that my life changed, and the Spirit's been with me ever since. And, unfortunately, I had some times of wavering, which started really right after, kind of when I got out of high school, wavered a bit in my 20s, kind of lived a party lifestyle in my college years, and really just put my world happiness above my godly happiness more than anything. And unfortunately, just ran into went to too many funerals, frankly, during that time frame. And eventually it was just a wake-up call that the life that I was living was not going to end up in a place where I wanted to be.
Right.
And even though I wavered, I knew where I belonged. So I just knew I needed to get back there. And it was many years of trying to figure that out. It wasn't, I ended up getting married in my mid-20s, and we did what I thought at the time was a good preparation to lay that foundation of a marriage built on Christ. But unfortunately, what we laid as a foundation just didn't sustain, and we ended up, the marriage didn't last, unfortunately, and it failed inevitably. We just didn't, and I didn't lead the way I needed to be as a husband. We didn't pursue Christ together, and unfortunately, it just didn't end up where it had hoped to be at the start through our intentions. But fortunately, I had my son became a father during that time frame, and thankful to have him in my life, of course. And he's in his early teens now, or late teens, pardon me. And through that time, it just, being a father changes you, I mean, it's an old saying, but it really does. It just kind of wakes you up to a lot of things and changes your priorities a bit. Yep. So I did what I could, knowing that I was a child of God, but still wasn't really following him, and got to a point around 2008, 2009 where I hit rock bottom, was really just suffering spiritually, was failure at being a husband, failure at being a father. I was in the financial world in 2008 where everything was crumbling and just was terrible at that. really just everything that I had placed my identity in at that time, husband, father, financial worker, good with money, all that stuff was failing. I was facing bankruptcy, living with my parents, renting my house out just to try to make ends meet, and living on credit, man, frankly. And just wasn't doing much of anything good. Fortunately, I ran across a program, kind of an experience-based program called Pathways, that really just opened my eyes up to what I was doing, what I was putting in life that kind of got me where I was at that point, and some of the decisions I was making and why I was doing those, and got to the bottom of why some of who I was and why I was leading the life I was leading, really. Right. And realized through that, one thing that I was not doing and what I was needed more in my life was Jesus.
Yeah.
And it was around 1st of 2009. It was through a simple invite of really kind of acquaintance of mine to a church, and just this church that was doing things differently than any other church I've ever been to. It's probably the first time I'd gone to church, really, in probably a good 5 years or so at that point. And I just thought, oh man, I got to keep coming back here, and I remember getting to it's a few months later, after I'd been going there for a few months. Father's Day 2009 came about, and I remember the message clearly, and I just felt like I was sitting there, like I was the only one in the auditorium. It was me, the pastor, and God. It was this really surreal feeling.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget that. Even just gave me goosebumps, and just felt like, okay, God, you're really speaking to me here. And it was a great Father's Day message, and I ended up recommitting my life to God that day, and knew that, hey, like, this is what I've been missing all these years. I knew it in my heart, but I wasn't following it. I thought maybe I just checked a box, or just didn't feel like I wasn't believed in God, but I wasn't really living like it.
Right.
And from that point, I've recommitted my life. Met a great dude at church that day, and just kept meeting more and more people and surrounding myself with the right people. And through that, ended up meeting my current wife, and man, she's just been so great to me in my life, and I just appreciate all that God's done through her, and how she's used her to help me and to see me. And I wouldn't be sitting right here today if it wasn't for her, and how she's supported me like no one ever has. And I've had a lot of great people in my life, but needed her. Yeah. And her son, who I call my own son now, and I have two boys now, both in their late teens, starting their own life, and just couldn't be more thankful for the family dynamic that I have. And just my wife and I, we've been together for about 10 years now, and just couldn't be more thankful for her and our relationship. And she's the one that's really kind of given me this opportunity, and put sacrifices she's done to help me be doing this with you, Chris. And just thankful for that, and the community that we built around us, including our families together, and our small group, which we call a life group. And those people, we share life together. We break bread every week that we can, and just share those important moments in our life. And if you don't have that type of community in your life, man, I don't know how you're doing it. I really hope that you find that somehow, and we hope to encourage you along that way. And we'll be talking about that if you continue to listen to us here in future episodes. But that's kind of my story, and what's brought me through this. Fortunately that I'm in a spot in my life now where a lot of things are coming into place, and I'm thankful for that, and just want to do my part to just to share that with others, and hopefully lift people up along the way, and make disciples out of all of us, including myself.
Yeah, man, that's great. Yeah, it's amazing how God will use those times of struggle and where we've fallen short to kind of open our eyes and so we can grow in those areas. And it's great to be able to turn and look back and give all that glory to Him. So yeah, I'm right there with you, man.
Yeah, man.
I tell you, I share a lot of similar characteristics to your story and my story. I was born into a Christian family, and grew up in the church. Both sets of my parents, my grandparents, both sets of my grandparents were actually married until they died, and were heavily involved in the church, pastoring and evangelizing and all kinds of things. So to have them set such a good example to my parents are still married, first marriage, only marriage, and doing the same thing. I grew up, my dad was our pastor. He's also a firefighter, retired firefighter now. My mom worked in one of the local banks and became a school teacher and retired from that. So just regular people working hard but loving Jesus, and had us, me and my two brothers, heavily involved at church. And at one point we were, we might be given the invocation, doing the offertory and reading a scripture or something like that, picking up the plates, for offering.
Yeah.
We were doing it all. Our family was, really holding down our little church there, and it was great. And fortunately, going through that experience and growing up in that small community, that small group, I had a really great Sunday school teacher that poured into me and my brothers, and just really taught us so much about the Bible, so much about those stories that as I hear those stories today, I just almost could hear her voice in those lessons. And so it was such a great reminder. And then coming through that, coming through that as a kid and growing up, it was cool. When I got to 8 years old, I was baptized and, became a member of our church at that point, and was really excited about Jesus, and was able to start going to church camps and all those kind of things. And I went through church camps from that point all the way into, through high school, sacrificing, baseball time or athletic time on the field to be able to go to these church camps. And it was just, going to that was my top priority.
Yeah.
And I was really doing, had what I felt like, had my life going the right direction. And then just as you get older, you kind of start to fade and things kind of change a little bit. And so coming into my senior year, kind of started partying a little bit and kind of walking away from my faith a little bit. Not that I was denying God, but just kind of losing that fire,
Yeah, I know what you mean.
I got signed up, enlisted in the Air Force. And so me and all my buddies, we all left home about the same time. They went to college, and I went into the Air Force basic training, and came back at Christmas, and they're all back working at the gas station or wherever. And they're like, "Oh man, you're back." And I'm like, "Yeah, but just for the week, And they're like, "Oh, well, we're back for good. They kicked us out because they were still partying too hard, and they didn't have any jobs anymore. Or any school anymore. So their lives were drastically different than they had hoped. But fortunately, I'd made a good decision in signing up for the Air Force, and it definitely took me all over the world.
I bet.
So I was new into my Air Force career, got married, and we moved away from Oklahoma, moved out to California, and we were out there, had my oldest daughter out there, and then I promptly got shipped out to Korea. Spent a year over there in Korea by myself. More party lifestyle, very much the military standard for that. Being away from families, a lot of drinking and all that, typically back then. And then came back and we moved to Germany, and more of the same, but with your family this time. And I just wasn't really focused on Jesus, and I was living that party life and focused on my career and put that above everything else, including Jesus, including my marriage, and just devastated that relationship. And unfortunately, it failed. But I learned a lot of great things coming out of that, and realized I needed to make a change. And so as we started processing through separation and the divorce, I remember right when it first started, walking to the refrigerator and opening the refrigerator and looking in there and seeing like the alcohol in the fridge, And I thought, man, I could just try to drink this away. And it was the Spirit that pulled me away from that and said, that's not right. Turn around. And so at that moment, like, I began to repent and turn around and realize that's not the life that I want to lead anymore. That's what got me here. I need to change. And so I turned around and went right back to church and got involved in church. Moved back to the U.S., was stationed down in Alabama. I was down there for a while, got through the divorce, was heavily involved in church. We had services Wednesday nights, Sundays, Sunday nights. Between all of those, serving at the church, doing Bible studies and small groups there, just really was all in about changing my life and getting back into that relationship with Christ, kind of like you were talking about, just recommitting and being there. And really what God was doing was moving and working in my heart and changing my heart and my mind. And at that point, I was not too far out from moving back to Oklahoma for my last assignment in the Air Force. And I met my awesome wife. She is fantastic. She definitely challenges me and encourages me and pushes me. But she is so smart, and I just fell in love with her smile. And she is just such a great person, and I'm so thankful for her. And she was kind of a combined package deal, because I met her and then found out that she had a daughter.
Right.
So I got her too, and so now I had two daughters, and it was great. Like, both my daughters are amazing, so different, and both so smart, and so thankful for them. And so we moved to Oklahoma, and we were able to get heavily involved in the church there just almost immediately. Fell into the same church that you discovered, and we really just kind of were all in. And so it was great. I think what really sold us on in the church was going one Sunday, and my wife's daughter was in the kids class, and I think she was maybe 2 years old. And we got in the truck after church, and I said, "Hey, what did you learn in your class?" And she said, "I learned a verse." And I said, "What'd you learn?" And she folded her hands and opened them like a book. And she was like, "John 3:16, for God so loved the world." And
oh, that's awesome.
man, it was so powerful at that moment. Like, my wife and I looked at each other and knew, like, that's where we need to be. And so, like, if they're going to be that invested in our kids where they walk out of church after an hour and they already know a verse, like, that's awesome.
Yeah,
so,
for sure.
yeah, we were all in on that. And, yeah, so we wound up, my wife was actually in the Air Force at that time. She separated from the Air Force and went back to school. I started working in the medical field. And I stuck with the Air Force, wound up retiring after 20 years in the military. So that was great. I'd be able to retire at 38 years old. It was awesome. Fortunately, the skills I learned in the Air Force transferred into a job on the outside. So that's what I do today.
Yeah.
And but yeah, it's that job that moved us down here to Texas and got us acquainted with you and with the church here. And man, it's great to be able to just turn and, like I said, look back, and you can see where God uses those low points.
Yeah.
And really kind of shines through that darkness, and so you can see Him, and you can see where, we've made mistakes, and not to shy away from that, but we've made those mistakes and we've learned from them, and we're able to give God the glory for all of that.
Absolutely, and I appreciate you sharing all that, Chris. And you're right. I mean, we want to. We just gave you a little bit about our backgrounds today, but there's certainly a lot more that we have to share over time, and we will. We're going to talk about our sufferings and what we struggled to get to where we are today. Don't want to share with you everything in the first episode, but if you continue to come back, you'll hear more about it. But we're just a couple of dudes, not much different than you, probably, at the end of the day. And, we're suffering through the same things you are. We're dealing with the same problems. We just want to lift you up and just try to, and it's lifting us up just to be able to do this.
Yeah.
So I'm just, can't be more, more thankful to have this opportunity to share with others. And we hope that it makes a difference in people's lives. Because it's certainly already making a difference in ours.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
just talk about it. Just getting out here. So today, we're getting it started. So this is it. So we laid the framework here about kind of why we're going to do this, and a little bit about us as well. But we also just wanted to talk a bit about a movement that we're going to start, and it's really so let me talk about what it is that it is. So a few years ago, what is it? Probably about 3 years ago, I guess now, Chris.
Yeah, I think so.
And I hurt my hand actually in a little accident, being stupid, really, just a typical man thing, trying to do too much at once, and ended up hitting my hand really hard on a car door, actually it was a side view mirror on my truck. And I just remember that day, my hand was just on fire. Mm-hmm. I mean, my right hand, all the ligaments or tendons, were stretched and inflamed, and I just remember immediately being in pain, and it lasted for a while. And when you do everything with your right hand, it's hard for that thing to heal.
Yeah.
So I've done a lot of things in life. Talked to doctors, done some chiropractic care, physical therapy, to strengthen it, and it kind of goes back and forth. There'll be periods where I do really well, my hand's not hurting, and then other times where it's just hurting all the time. So. Yeah. I do, as I mentioned earlier, I am in finance. I work in kind of customer facing and digital communication with clients. So I do see a lot of people face to face, and of course, we're volunteering at our church and everything. So shaking a lot of hands is not really good when you have a right-handed issue.
That's right.
Along the way, I started just shaking hands with people left-handed. Mm-hmm. And the reaction that I got was it's different. Yeah. I would have to think about, like, okay, every time I shake a hand, right? Can I do it? Am I hurting? Whatever. So I got to a point where I was just doing it every time, left, shaking with that left hand. So it came to me one night as we're kind of brainstorming on this podcast and what it's going to be like and what we're going to include in here. So we're going to adopt a segment each and every week that's called the Left-Handed Shake, and through that, we just want to kind of really spark a movement for people to just have a moment of vulnerability with people, and to be willing to connect with other people in a way that you're not as comfortable. Because when you shake hands left-handed, a couple things happen. Number one is it's unusual, right? So you're kind of doing something that's out of your comfort zone, and we Chris and I are big believers, and if you're going to grow, it's going to be uncomfortable, right? So it does that, but also it creates this posture of vulnerability. And I think that's when you do that, it just kind of helps break down these walls and such. And I know, Chris, you got stuff to share about that posture of vulnerability with us.
Yeah, Matt. So it was really cool when you brought this up to me, the left-handed shake, and I thought, what a great idea. And growing up and being in the military, everything we did in the military was right-handed too.
Right.
And so I was like, okay, and I know in some parts of the world, shaking left-handed is taboo or frowned upon, but there's actually some really good history on the left-handed shake. And one of the cool things I found was that scouts around the world use the left-handed shake. And it's only amongst scouts, typically like when they're in uniform or having a ceremony or getting ready for whatever their activity is. Mm-hmm. And it's a form of greeting each other, and they do it with their left hand because our hearts are slightly off center towards our left side. And so it's actually the hand that's closer to our hearts. And so that's why they do that. And I thought, man, what a great idea. And it really kind of inspires that trust and like vulnerability in that shake.
Yes.
And so another thing I found was in some cultures around the world, what they've done is a lot of the warriors in that culture, traditionally you'll hold your weapon in your right hand. Because most people are right-handed. Right. And so you're going to hold your sword or your spear or javelin or whatever in your right hand. And in your left hand, you would have your shield.
Your defense.
Your defense. And so One of the great stories I found was about some of these warriors. Some of them more detailed in the story was some of these African warriors were actually setting their shields down, like holding their shields up, just leaning them over or whatever, and having to support them with their weapon hand, or laying them flat down. But they're shaking with their left hand. And that's an act of vulnerability. They're no longer able to defend themselves.
Right.
They don't have the walls up. They're not protected anymore. And so how interesting that is translates straight into what we're talking about here, that giving that sense of vulnerability and just taking down those walls so we can be vulnerable. Just like you reaching out with that left hand and offering your left hand, and you have to explain that. What happened? You're immediately vulnerable there. Those warriors were vulnerable the same, having to set that shield down to shake left-handed. And so I just was amazed finding these stories and thought, man, what a great little nugget there, and how it does help us come to that posture of vulnerability.
Yeah, those are great stories, man. I really like that. And this is totally organic. This whole thing, it came about. I mean, it's not like we planned this by any means. It was just something that happened. It was kind of a God thing, really. That and this is another great example of about sometimes your things that you think are hindrance or these sort of suffering or setbacks, God can actually use to make the world a better place and to make you a more well-rounded person and to build your faith. And this is a great example of it, because through all that, you're right. Every time I shake somebody's hand left-handed, it always brings up a story that I have to tell them about it.
Yep.
Which automatically just brings down, vulnerability out there. Hey, Matt, I screwed up,
Yeah.
I made a stupid mistake. And so consequently my hand hurts occasionally. So I'm going to shake hands with you left-handed. And every time that I have that thought about, okay, I see this person, I'm going to shake right or left, how am I feeling that way? Well, when I have that moment there in my split-second thought, like if I shake it with my left hand, I'm reminded of this movement that we're hoping to spark, and just that act of vulnerability, which is really an act of triggering obedience,
right.
To being available to God's prompting. And I've had, as you're going to find out there, folks, that every week Chris and I are going to bring up a story how we're having these, conversations with people. And just to have these moments where we're connecting with strangers or co-workers or people that we just meet at church or anywhere, at the gym, anywhere you're at, just to constantly be available. And that's really the whole movement that we want to spark, is that we all need to be available to God's prompting, and this whole left-handed shake is just a name put on that, just to remind us all, like, hey, we're not as strong as we think we are.
Right.
And it's important to lay down our defenses so we can meet people, where they are, and be willing to be vulnerable with them, because we believe that when you start that act of vulnerability, people will reciprocate that.
That's right. Vulnerability breeds vulnerability.
Yes. 100%. So that's really the thought behind this whole left-handed shake. And now, whether you choose to shake hands left-handed, we'll leave that up to you guys. But ultimately, we just want to have create that posture of vulnerability, and just to have that front of mind. So when you're meeting people out in the world, that you can, just think, how can you be a blessing to others, and just to shift the focus off of ourselves and our busy lives. Because if you're like me and Chris, I mean, you got a calendar that's full every 7 days a week, right?
Oh yeah.
And there's not much room for God to operate on that sometimes. God's looking at our calendars like, well, where am I at in this thing,
That's right?
So if we can just have that something that's kind of front of mind, to just be aware that God can interrupt us, that He can use us at any time. But we have to be willing to be available, and just to have something to remind us that about a trigger of obedience. And really, that's the whole thought process behind this left-handed shake, and really this whole podcast thing we have called Discipleship on Repeat. It's a trigger of obedience to have continual connection with God, so you can be available to Him and be available to His promptings, and trigger your obedience toward Him.
That's right. Yeah. Being vulnerable and willing to step into his calling and act obediently. Even just delaying is still disobedience, right? So just
Yes.
being proactive and jumping straight in there without hesitation. I think that's where we're trying to get to. And I know I'm still learning that.
Yeah.
But I'm making steps every day, making progress every day. And so this podcast is a great example of that for me, for sure. And I hope it is for our listeners as well.
That's right. And this is a great opportunity for us to have share all these things with everybody. And this has been a great first episode, really just to lay that framework for everybody, so you understand what you're going to listen to. Like I said, this episode is going to be 100% different than the rest of the episodes you're going to listen to. We just wanted to get some of that framework out there and introduce ourselves to you, give us a little bit about our backgrounds. We're going to share more of that with you, and then just hopefully inspire you through a left-handed shake and then spark a movement for you to be available to God's promptings and to just have that mindset of vulnerability to share with others. So we're thankful for you guys listening in. We hope that you come back. Please like and subscribe and continue to follow us if you feel so inclined. We do have our email address here. It's going to be listed in the show notes, discipleshiponrepeat@gmail.com. We'd love to get your feedback, good or bad. Just listen to it a little bit more if you don't mind, before you give us too much feedback. So, but we'd love to hear that. So please come back again and listen to us again here real soon. And until next time, keep grinding.